And also to repeat what Mark Shatara said, that this is the first talk of a new theme. So on these Tuesday nights, we explore a connected theme for usually 12 weeks or so. And tonight we're starting a new theme, as I said. So for the next 12 weeks or so, we're going to be exploring a very important traditional text called the Bodhicaryavatara. Bodhi means enlightenment, awakening. Charya means something like pathway. Avatara means something like guide. So it's something like the guide to the path to awakening, the guide to the path to enlightenment. And this text was written by an 8th century monk called Santideva, who lived at the great monastic university of Nalanda in northern India. So some of our Sangha have been to Nalanda, the ruins of Nalanda, on our pilgrimage and seen it there. At the time, it's said to have been the largest university in the world at the time, quite possibly. So the Bodhicaryavatara, the text that Santideva wrote, it's an incredibly important text in Buddhism. It's really the foundation for a lot of what's best in Tibetan Buddhism. The Dalai Lama tells us that it's his main inspiration and that he reads it every day. It was the first text that our founder Sangharakshita led study on after he founded the order. And he has said that all serious Buddhists in Triratna should read it and study it. It's a text that gives us this really inspiring vision of the spiritual path, and also some really down-to-earth advice, about how to transform our lives through the practice of the Dharma, which is just as relevant today as it was, 1,300 years ago when it was written. And there's a traditional story surrounding Shantideva and the Bodhicaryavatara, which you just sort of have to tell, although I don't believe a word of it. But I'll tell it to you anyway. So it's said that Shantideva, as a monk, seemed to all intents and purposes to be a complete waste of space. He slept or he lounged around all day. He never seemed to meditate or study the Dharma or read in the library. And he only seemed to join in with the community at meal times. In fact, he seemed so lazy that the other monks gave him a nickname, which was the monk of the 3 attainments. And the 3 attainments were eating, sleeping, and defecating. Now, apparently it was the custom at Nalanda every so often that one of the more eminent monks would be invited to give an important discourse to the whole community. This would be in the open air to this huge audience. There were loads and loads of monks at Nalanda, so a huge audience out in the open air. So some of the monks thought that it would be a good joke to play on Shantideva, to nominate him to give this talk. What a joke that would be, the monk of the 3 attainments giving a talk. He would, if it somehow came about that he was invited to give the talk, he would be shown up for what he is. This would be a big laugh. He'd be exposed, and he'd probably be so shamed that he would have to leave the monastery, and it would be rid of a waste of space. And Shantideva, in fact, was asked to speak. So when the day came for the big talk, the mischievous monks were all ready to laugh and heckle and humiliate him. But what happened instead was that as soon as he opened his mouth, they realized that he was speaking in beautiful, sublime Sanskrit poetry. And not only was the poetry sublime, the content was deep and inspiring. So his stunned audience heard him deliver what we now know as the Bodhicaryavatara, this inspiring wise text, which runs to maybe nearly 200 pages in English. They saw him deliver this just like that, from beginning to end. And not only that, as he got towards the end of his discourse, we're told that he gradually began to float up into the air, up above his audience. So he was sitting in the sky. So they had to strain their necks to look up at him. And then as he spoke the very last word of the discourse, he vanished into space. Poof. And it's said that at that point he left the monastery and all these rather nasty monks that had been trying to humiliate him and its politics, and he went to live in the slums among the poorest of the poor, teaching and helping the outcasts of society to liberate themselves through the Dharma. So it might be obvious why I say I don't believe a word of that, but it's not because of the flying up into the air, etc., etc. It's because there's another work of Shantideva's that's come down to us called the Shiksha Samuccaya. And this is a work of really considerable scholarship. It references many, many other Buddhist texts that don't exist anymore. And very often, the only hint we've got of their existence or what they contain is what Shantideva says about them. So he had this deep and wide knowledge of the Dharma, which he couldn't have got while sleeping and lying around. At the very least, he couldn't have been such a dunce. At the very least, he would have been a regular visitor to the library at the very least. So that's a nice story that always gets quoted when people talk about Shantideva, and it's a good cautionary tale about not judging people by appearances, but it doesn't really tell us probably much about Shantideva or the text we'll be exploring. So, okay, let's just start, kick things off. Let's just get a bit of an overview of the text before we get down to detail and what it can tell us about our practice of the Dharma. So we'll often be referring to a condensed version of the text that is used for study within Triratna. You can buy, if you look in the bookshop, you can buy in book form several different translations, and you may want to do that. You might want to do that. But we'll be making this condensed version available online, and I hope in booklet form as well. We might give out booklets, but it'll certainly be online. There'll be a link on our website very soon. And as an introduction to the Bodhicaryavatara, this short version might work better for you. It might work better for you. A lot of the translations have been done by scholars for scholars. And they aren't always that easy to read sometimes, or even that clear sometimes as to what they do mean. Plus also the full text has a lot of repetition, and it's got quite long passages that people agree nobody knows anymore what they mean. So, yeah, they've been edited out of the short version, so you might get on better with that. And we will be making this shorter version available for free. So, okay, the first thing to say about the Bodhicaryavatara is that a lot of the text is structured around a formulation of the Buddhist path called the 6 paramitas, sometimes called the 6 perfections, but paramita translates better as way to the other shore. It's the 6 practices that allow us to transcend ourselves as we are now. And we'll be saying a lot more about these 6 paramitas as we move through this series of talks. But for now, and for the next couple of weeks, we're going to concentrate more on another very practical list that's embedded in the early chapters of the Bodhicaryavatara. And this list is rather off-puttingly called the 5 object-determining mental events. Don't panic. Don't panic. It's actually really quite straightforward and really very, very practical, despite the clunky name. Instead of the object-determining mental events, it could well be called the object-achieving mental events, because these are the mental events we need to cultivate in the right order to achieve any object, to achieve any aim or goal. They are the mental events that we need to bring about in our mind if we want to succeed at anything, if we want to do anything really successfully, if we want to make anything happen, if we want to pass an exam, if we want to rob a bank, or if we want to get enlightened, we need to bring these mental events into existence. And these mental events, they're called the viniyatas in Sanskrit. So, the object determining events. In our talks, we'll be saying a lot more about them and how we can bring these into existence. So a lot of what we'll talk about is how do we bring these into existence, but so that we can succeed in what we want to do. But for now, I'll just give you the bare outline of the list. So I say also that we often apply these viniyatas without actually being conscious of it, or we wouldn't achieve anything. But we also often set out to achieve something and don't succeed because we don't apply the viniyatas. So it helps to make the process that we describe really conscious, okay? So first of all, the first of the viniyatas is, first thing we need to do to achieve anything is we need to want it, desire. To achieve anything, first of all, we need to really want it. And I mean really want it, not just think it would be a good thing or think we should. We have to want it with quite a lot of our being. The way we might want that perfect job, or the way we might want that relationship to start with somebody that we love. So the Sanskrit word for this vinayata is chanda. Chanda. And chanda can be translated as desire. It can be translated as interest or fascination, often translated as fascination. So it's not just a vague wanting, it's a wanting based on even a fascination with the object that we want. And it's worth pointing out at this point that there's a common idea that according to Buddhism, all desire is a bad thing. We mustn't desire. All desire is a bad thing. And that is just not true. It is just not true that Buddhism teaches that. Buddhism does encourage us to free ourselves from, say, addictive desire. And it also encourage us to free ourselves from what we could call neurotic desire. Desire for something which is not going to satisfy the need that we think it's going to satisfy. So these things, addictive desire, neurotic desire, yes, they can keep us on a treadmill chasing a carrot that can never be caught, and we can spend our whole life chasing that carrot and never catch it, never get satisfaction. But we do need healthy, positive desire. There are perfectly healthy, positive desires for the necessities of life, for an environment in which we can thrive, for friendship, for a sense of community, for the sense of living a meaningful life, and for spiritual progress, To make progress in the spiritual life, we have to want it. We have to desire it. We have to have chanda. We need to want to grow and fulfill our full potential. Otherwise, we'll get nowhere. We won't even start out on the path. Or we'll go through the motions thinking, oh, it might be quite a good thing. So we need desire. We need chanda of the right sort. And to cultivate chanda, to make chanda arise in our mind, what helps, what is often absolutely essential, is to spend some time imagining just how good it would be to achieve our aim. And maybe sometimes how bad it would be not to achieve our aim. If we do that, then our goal becomes real for us and important for us in a way that it could never be if it was just a sort of sense that that would be a vague good thing. We have to really have that sense of, like, yeah, I want this. Usually the first step in achieving anything is to imagine that goal, to get a taste of what it would be like. In a way, I think that's one of the important functions of the imagination, to show us what the future could be, to show us potentialities that are not there in our present experience so that we can want them and move towards them. So we'll be coming back to that later in this talk and in our meditation after the break. So the first thing we need is we need to want it. We need chanda. But as well as chanda, as well as desire, as well as deeply wanting to attain our goal, we need to make a firm decision to actually do the things that will bring that result about. It's not enough to just want to be more fit and healthy. We also need to decide to do something to bring that about. We need to decide to take out a gym membership and spend X hours a week exercising, or to run a certain distance every day, or to go out for a walk 5 days a week in the Peak District. We need to decide to do the things that will bring it about. So we need to decide. We need to want, and then we need to decide. So that's the second vinayata, adimoksha in Sanskrit. Adimoksha can also be translated as determination. So it's a strong decision, a determined decision that we make with our whole being, based on really wanting to achieve our goal, based on chanda. But even making that firm decision is not enough. Even if we all know that we can decide to do something, but then it seems to get forgotten. It seems to get forgotten amidst the pressures and the hurly-burly of everyday life. Other things come up that seem more urgent or more interesting, or we just get distracted and we forget. Our minds can be like sieves, and our decisions can just slip through the holes and somehow vanish. We just get distracted, we forget. So we need to remember our decision amidst the hurly-burly of everyday life and put it into effect. So the Sanskrit term for this third vinayata, after wanting and deciding, is smrti. We need to remember smrti. So smrti is normally translated as mindfulness. It's one of the 3 words that not often gets translated as mindfulness. But literally, it just means recollection. Remembering. So to carry through our decision, we need to remember it, to keep it in mind, to keep mindful of it. And there's another word for mindfulness which could have been used in this context, which I've forgotten. Samprajana. Well done, thank you. Senior moment there. Samprajana, yeah, so that's one of the other words that gets used for mindfulness. And it means continuity of purpose. It means keeping our purpose in mind. So that word could have been very easily used instead of smrti. But yeah, mindfulness, we need to remember it, and it needs to be there in our mind. To carry through our decision, we need to remember it, keep it in mind, keep mindful of it. But even remembering our goal isn't enough. We also need the fourth vinayata. We need to focus our mind on the goal, to focus our mental energies and even our emotions to bring the goal about, especially if our goal is something relatively complex or relatively difficult, like gaining enlightenment or robbing a bank. That is not going to happen unless we focus our attention and focus our energies on it. So the Sanskrit term for this fourth vinayata is samadhi. And samadhi can have loads of different meanings in Buddhism. It's often translated as one-pointedness and used to describe the sort of one-pointedness, the effortless coming together of our whole being and our concentration, our focus in meditation. But at a more worldly level, we also need one-pointedness and focus to achieve any difficult or complex goal. So you might remember how focused your being was at some point when you were preparing for an exam you really wanted to pass. I mean, it just becomes what we're doing. That's what we're doing. We're focused on that. I really want this to happen. We focus our whole being on it. Or you might remember how one-pointed you were when you were in love. I mean, you just think about nothing else. Where's she going to be? Or where's he going to be? And can I be there? And et cetera, et cetera. I'm remembering my adolescence. So yeah, we need to focus. And then the final vinayata is called in Sanskrit pranya. And pranya is another word that can take a range of meanings. It's often used to mean wisdom, the goal of Buddhism and the goal of meditation. When the viniyatas are applied to success in meditation, that may be what it means, but pranya also means, can be used to mean just ordinary cleverness, intelligence, nous. It's not enough to want to attain something, to decide to do what is necessary to attain something, to keep that decision in mind and focus on it. We also need to think about how to achieve it. We need to use some nous. If it's passing an exam, we need to think, well, what sort of questions are going to come up? What are the important topics? What are the topics we can ignore? And so on. If it's robbing a bank, we need to give some serious thought to alarm systems. And if it's gaining enlightenment, well, we need some nous about what practices will work for us, what conditions we need, what are our strengths, what are our weaknesses, what can I achieve at the moment and what can't I, what might be my next goal, and so on. We need to use some nous, so we need to think as well as all the others. So those are the 5 viniyatas. We need them to achieve anything, to pass an exam, to rob a bank, to attain enlightenment. And Santideva wants to help us to attain enlightenment. So the first 5 chapters of his work, he takes us through these mental processes. He takes us through the mental processes that the viniyatas describe. He tries to bring these mental events out in our being so that we can be successful in our attempt to attain enlightenment. And that's what we're going to be exploring for the first few weeks of this series, this theme. So on the one hand, we're going to be looking at Shantideva's Bodhicaryavatara, the guide to the path, and exploring how we can apply this to our path here and now. It's full of just great spiritual advice. But as we do this, we'll also be looking at the viniyatas and how we can use them in our practice and in our life. Because even if you're not interested in moving towards enlightenment, which I hope you are, but even if you're not, it's well worth knowing about the viniyatas because we're going to need them to achieve anything. And it's a big help. To pass an exam, you may want to pass exams. I hope you won't want to rob banks. So if we want to be successful in any of the things we do, it's a big help to know about the viniyatas. So in the first few chapters of the Bodhicaryavatara, Shantideva takes us through these viniyatas. And in his first chapter, which I'm going to talk about for the rest of my talk, he focuses on the first, desire, chanda, wanting. He sets out to help us to imagine just how good it would be to leave behind our usual small mind and to step into what we might call big mind. To allow what we might call big mind to manifest through us. So Shantideva is talking about enlightenment in a particular way, a way that may seem a bit odd to us, especially if we haven't come across it before. He talks about it as, if you like, getting our small mind, usual small mind, out of the way and allowing what I've called big mind to manifest through us. Allowing a larger, wiser, more expansive mind to as it were, take over. And the word Shantideva uses for what I've been calling big mind, the traditional term, is bodhicitta. So bodhicitta, we have this word bodhi again, awakening, enlightenment. And we have this word chitta, which can be used to mean mind or heart. Buddhism doesn't make such a sharp distinction between what we feel and what we think, as we tend to do in the West. The way we think and the way we feel are just intimately related. You can't really separate them. So this term, bodhicitta, it could be translated as awakened mind, awakened heart, or enlightened mind. It's not always used to mean the full enlightenment. It can also mean something a bit stepped down from that we might find easier to relate to. So we'll be saying more about bodhicitta as we go through this series of talks. But for now, it's enough to say that Santideva talks very much in terms of inviting this bodhicitta to manifest through us, as though it was something coming from outside, rather than seeing enlightenment as something we sort of make within ourselves, by improving ourselves a bit here and a bit there until we've eventually sort of constructed a Buddha within ourselves, changed ourselves into an enlightened being. And that may seem a very odd way of thinking about how we make spiritual progress. But actually, if we think about it, maybe it isn't as strange as all that. We're not enlightened at present. So the enlightened mind is, as it were, something outside our present mind. And what stops that enlightened mind from shining through us is our present small mind with our little wants and our worries and our limited perspective, our limited idea of who we are and what we could be. So thinking of spiritual progress in terms of more and more getting our old small mind out of the way and more and more letting go of our limiting idea of ourselves and more letting a bigger mind manifest, letting bodhicitta manifest through us. Thinking about it like that is maybe not as daft as it first sounds. Maybe could be quite valid and useful way of thinking about it. And it certainly seems to be the way that Shantideva often thinks about the spiritual path. So in his first chapter, what he wants to do is to help us to bring about chanda, to bring about a strong desire, even a fascination for the bodhicitta or for spiritual practice in general. So the first thing he does is he tells us that we have a very, very precious opportunity right now to make our life truly meaningful, an opportunity which may not come again. So we need to use it. He tells us we're enjoying a particular set of highly favorable and rare conditions that allow us to practice the Dharma and make progress. He says, verse 4, this precious opportunity with the leisure and other conditions needed to practice the Dharma is extremely rare. This is what makes life meaningful. If we waste it now, when will we come again? And there's a sort of traditional list of the things that we need to have this precious opportunity. We have this precious opportunity, we shouldn't waste it. So the traditional list tells us that firstly, we've been born as a human. We may take that for granted, but typically it's often seen as quite an achievement and a rare condition in itself. We could have been born as all sorts of beings that have very little hope of making any spiritual progress at all. I believe that in the Tibetan tradition they sometimes talk about it as being as rare as a turtle in the ocean putting its head up in a mighty ocean, and there just happens to be one yolk, not an egg yolk, a thing you put around horses' heads, floating in the ocean, and the turtle puts its head up through that. That's how rare it is. It's as rare as that. So we've been born a human. We've attained this particularly favored human state. If we want to think about it in modern scientific terms, we could reflect that being a human, having the sort of self-reflective consciousness we've got, is the culmination of a long process of evolution. It's been hard won, and we would, in a sense, be betraying the universe if we didn't use that consciousness, if we frittered it away on trivial concerns. So we've got this precious opportunity. But even being born a human, if that's lucky enough, but even that's not enough. We've been born in a civilized society where spiritual practice is possible. We aren't constantly fighting for survival or protecting our children. We've been born at a time when the Dharma exists, still there in the world. We've had the good fortune to come across the Sangha. We have good enough physical and mental health to allow us to practice the Dharma. We don't have the sort of deeply ingrained wrong views that would mean that we were completely unreceptive to the Dharma. And quite simply, we have enough leisure to allow us to practice. We don't have to work all the time. We don't have to use all our energies just to sort of get enough to live, for us and our dependents to live. So you can imagine this as a sort of, each one of those is like a circle, and you have to be within all the circles. The overlap is tiny. I don't know if you know anything about set theory, but the overlap between all those different circles is tiny. It's a very precious opportunity. Most humans who have ever lived have not had all those advantages. This combination of conditions is very rare, and we're very lucky, so let's not waste that precious opportunity. So Santideva invites us to reflect on that. And in fact, that reflection has been taken up in some schools of Buddhism. People are just encouraged to do it like every day. I've got a precious opportunity. Start the day with that. And then he moves on. Then Shantideva moves on to try to, as I say, help us to get a sense of how good it would be to open ourselves up to the bodhicitta in order to help us to generate that chanda. Firstly, he tells us that the bodhicitta is quite simply the key to happiness. Getting our ego wants is not the key to happiness. Opening up to the bodhicitta is the key to happiness. So he says, the Buddhas have seen that the bodhicitta is the one blessing that brings true joy and bliss. Those who want to transcend the sufferings of conditioned existence, those who want to relieve the sufferings of others, and those who want to experience joy in their own hearts should never abandon the bodhicitta. So that's the way to happiness. Why wouldn't we want it? Then he tells us that letting go of our usual small mind and opening up to the bodhicitta would be like getting out of jail. It would be like getting out of jail. At the moment, it's as though we're imprisoned. We're imprisoned in our small mind, in our sometimes rather silly thoughts, our limited idea of ourselves, our usual sort of thought patterns, our self-created unhappinesses, our self-created weaknesses and anxieties. We're imprisoned in all of that and our limited perspective. If we could let go of all that and allow the bodhicitta to manifest in us, it would be like getting out of jail. And not just any sort of jail, not the sort of jail we have now, with a TV set in the corner, not the sort of jail we have in Britain in the 21st century, but the sort of jail they had in Shantideva's time, where you were chained up. It was damp and dark, and you didn't get decent food, and so you're weak and ill and miserable all the time. It was that sort of jail. It would be like getting out of that sort of jail. It would be as good as that. And not only would it be as good as that, it would be like being let out of jail into the sunshine and being greeted as a hero. Maybe there'd be marching bands. Hooray, hooray for Vadanya in my case. Yeah. Hooray, hooray. We'd be greeted as a great hero, a great person, royalty, someone to be honored. We'd become someone truly worthy of respect, a great man or woman. So he tells us, the moment the bodhicitta arises in someone fettered and weak in the jail of cyclic existence, they're instantly hailed as a son of the Buddhas and honored by gods and humans. And then he uses an analogy that might not be familiar to people today, but obviously was to people at the time. So he tells us that the bodhicitta is like the philosopher's stone. The philosopher's stone transforms base metal into gold. So it would transform our ordinary life from being something maybe dull and heavy, or maybe something a bit grungy, like rusty iron. It would transform it from that into something bright and shining and precious. In fact, it would transform us from being something dull and heavy and maybe rather grungy into something bright and shining and highly valuable, the most valuable thing there is. Then he goes on to tell us that the bodhicitta would protect us like a great hero. It would protect us from what does he mean by that? How is it going to protect us? Well, it would protect us from the suffering we cause ourselves by our negative mental states and our unskillfulness. And in a sense, we would become invulnerable because we wouldn't care so much about the sufferings and pains that we normally take so seriously, because we'd be seeing the bigger picture. Our sense of meaning wouldn't come from our own comfort. It would come from being part of something much larger than ourselves, something much greater than ourselves. Then he tells us that the bodhicitta is like a great fire, which instantly burns up old habits and past karma. So if we let go of small mind and open up to the big mind of bodhicitta, in a sense our old self dies and a new higher self is born. It's as though we're stepping out of clothes that are too small for us and stepping into sort of royal robes or something like that. Our old self dies, a new higher self is born. So we would be leaving behind our old patterns, our old habits, and our old karmic patterns. He tells us that even to aspire for the bodhicitta brings great benefits. But even better than that, from the moment we let go of concern for our small self and act for the benefit of all, a continuous stream of what he calls merit rains down on us, even when we're asleep or distracted. We could say that we would be blessed. We would be constantly blessed. That might be one way of describing it. And finally, he tells us that the bodhicitta is the source of the world's joy and a cure for the world's suffering. It drives off the delusion that causes us so much suffering and allows us to see reality as it is, in all its beauty. He says there's nothing like it. Nothing can match it anywhere in the world. So as we see in this first chapter, bodhicitta is trying to make us aware of just how good it would be to invite the bodhicitta into our mind. I mean, it's an advert for the bodhicitta. You know, if a car had got these qualities, by heck, we'd buy it. You know, if we'd got the money. Why wouldn't you want it? Why wouldn't you want it? He's trying to make us aware of just how good it would be to get our little self out of the way and allow the bodhicitta to manifest in us. To the extent that we do that, we're going to be joyful, happy. Well, okay, the way he does that, the analogies he uses, the way he does it, they may or they may not work for us. But whether his way works or not, if we want to make spiritual progress, we need to ask ourselves, how good would it be? We need to imagine, how good would it be? Can we imagine just a bit what it might be like to be enlightened, or what it might be like to at least be more enlightened? What could we be like? Can we imagine what it would be like to be more like the person we have the potential to be? How good would that be without all the stuff that normally weighs us down? And if we can do that, we'll generate strong chanda. And if we do that, we'll be well and truly on the path. We'll be blown along the path by our chanda. So the first step in attaining enlightenment, the first step in achieving anything, is to really want it. And to want it deeply, we need to imagine strongly how good it would be. And sometimes how bad it would be if we don't. So yeah, to achieve anything, the first step is usually to imagine that goal, to get a taste of what it would be like to achieve it. That is the function of the imagination, to show us what the future could be, to see potentialities that aren't there in our present experience, including our potential to be larger than we are now. So it's an important practice in our Dharma life to do just that, to imagine as strongly as we clearly can what it would be like to step out of our old shabby clothes and put on these much richer robes, to step into much larger robes, a larger self. What it would be like to step out of our old self and into, if you like, our future wiser self, the self we could be. Perhaps even the enlightened self we could be. That's what we're doing when we visualize a Buddha or a Bodhisattva. We're sort of seeking to connect with the enlightened self that we could be. Or if that seems too far away, connecting with ourselves as we could be in the future. Our future wiser self, if you like. And we'll be doing a reflection after the break when we meditate to do that, to imagine our future wiser self. To just get a feel for how good that would be to be like that and what we need to do to move towards it. But for now, how about we take it on as a practice to set ourselves a goal, and to imagine how good it would be to achieve it, so that we generate some chanda, which will power us along the path towards that goal. So what would you like to achieve in your spiritual life, or maybe even just in your life? What would you like to achieve? What might your next goal be? To meditate every day, if you don't already, and enjoy the benefits that would bring, seeing much more beauty in the world, being calmer and more robust in the face of difficulty, feeling lots more positive emotion. That would be pretty good. To improve a relationship that isn't working very well. To be more effective at work, to get over the sort of ways we sabotage ourselves. To be more content and aware of the world and less dependent on distractions, phones, etc., 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 to sort of distract us from not feeling very good. To experience more metta and less ill will. To be more confident in certain situations. To let go of some harmful habit. What might our goal be? What might be a good goal? Or our goal could even be a worldly one, a purely worldly one, as long as it's not unskillful. No robbing banks, please. So then my suggestion for homework this week would be to take some time each morning as part of our meditation practice. I'm hoping we have a meditation practice. Take some time each morning to imagine how good would it be to achieve that goal? How good would it be to achieve that goal that I've set myself? Maybe how bad would it be otherwise? So that we generate that chanda, that first of the viniyatas, which is what we need to succeed. So as I've said, after the break, we'll be doing something like that as part of our meditation, imagining our future wiser self, what we could be like. And I'll repeat that we'll be making a version of the Bodhicaryavatara available to you online and hopefully in a booklet. And next week we'll be exploring chapters 2 and 3 of the Bodhicaryavatara and linking that to decision. How does it help us to really decide adimoksha, the second of the viniyatas? How can we turn our chanda into adimoksha? How can we turn our desire into a firm decision to act to bring that about? But for now, we're going to split up into some smaller groups. And what I suggest you might do is just explore this idea of what might my goal be? What might my goal be? It takes a bit of reflection, might help to talk to others about it. But what might be a good goal that I can realistically set myself, which I can really use, as it were, use the viniyatas to bring about over the course of time. Okay, thank you.